If you have a bucket list somewhere, a drawer, a folder, a note on your phone, with countries or parks or coastlines you've been meaning to get to before it's too late, I want you to think about where that list came from. Not the specific destinations, the impulse, the need to have it. Because there was a man I know who did exactly what that list promises. Every continent, every trip planned and taken, everything earned and spent on exactly what retirement is supposed to look like. He came home from the last one, and what he told me stopped me cold. He said, "I thought I was retired. Turns out I was just between jobs. The job was travel." I'm Ron. I spent 26 years in the Army and 18 more running emergency management for a county in North Carolina, and I'm 2 years into the retirement that is actually the real one. Grateful you're here, because what I'm about to get into is something nobody in this space wants to say plainly. If this kind of honesty is what you came for, subscribe and hit the bell. It's the most useful thing you can do for yourself right now, which is exactly what this channel is for. And before we go any further, write one thing in the comments that you find hard to admit about how you've been planning to spend retirement. Just the honest thing. You'll understand why I'm asking that in about 15 minutes. Because the question I want to leave you with today is one I almost never ask myself. And the answer to it changed everything about how I understand this transition. I know a man who spent the first 3 years of his retirement on every continent except Antarctica. He and his wife did it right. Planned for years, saved the destinations. Italy in the spring, Southeast Asia in the fall. A river cruise through Eastern Europe. National parks they'd driven past for decades and never stopped at. Every trip was something they'd earned, something they'd waited for, something they'd told themselves was the reason they'd worked as hard as they had for as long as they had. And by every external measure, those 3 years looked exactly like what retirement is supposed to look like. He came home from the last trip, and the problem was exactly where he left it. I'm Ron. I retired from the Army at 44 after 26 years. Took a county emergency management job 4 months later because I had no idea what to do with myself, and then retired again at 62. 2 years into the real retirement now. And I want to talk to you about something that I almost got wrong myself, something I've watched other men get very wrong, and something that nobody in the retirement space seems willing to say out loud. Spending your first 2 years of retirement traveling is a mistake. Not because travel is wrong, not because you haven't earned it, not because the destinations aren't real or the experiences aren't genuine, but because of what you are not doing while you are doing it. And because the thing you are not doing cannot wait 2 years without costing you something you cannot get back. I want you to stay with me on this. What I'm about to share took me longer than I'd like to admit to figure out, but once I saw it, I couldn't unsee it. Let me tell you what it actually feels like in those first weeks. You've left the job. The handshake happened. The card was signed by people whose names you've known for years. The parking pass is gone. The laptop is returned. And you wake up on a Monday morning, and for the first time in 30 or 40 years, Monday morning is not asking you for anything. Now that sounds like freedom. And in some ways it is. But there is something else in it too. Something that takes a few weeks to name. The coffee is hot. The house is quiet. And somewhere under that quiet is a sound that is hard to identify at first. Not panic, not sadness. Something closer to the feeling you get at the edge of a very wide open field with no path through it and no particular reason to cross it in any direction. How many of you have sat with that feeling? How many of you have sat at the kitchen table on a Wednesday morning, 9:15, and realized that for 30 years, 9:15 on a Wednesday meant something? A meeting, a call, a report due, a decision to be made, and now it means nothing in particular. How many of you have felt the specific and disorienting silence of a schedule that no longer has anything written in it? And here's the question I want to ask you. the one that sits underneath this whole video. When that silence arrived, what did you do with it? Because here is the truth about that silence. It is not a problem to be solved. It is a question to be answered. And the answer takes time. Uncomfortable, unproductive, unscheduled time. The kind of time that does not look good on a travel blog and does not produce photographs worth posting and does not give you anything to report when someone asks how retirement is going. The first impulse for almost everyone I have talked to is to fill it. Not because filling it is wrong, but because the silence is genuinely uncomfortable. And the motion of planning something, going somewhere, being in an airport or a hotel or a national park, gives the restlessness somewhere to go. What I want to examine today is the cost of that fill, not the cost to your savings. I am not a financial advisor and I have no business talking about your money. The cost I am talking about is the cost to the one thing that retirement is actually asking you to build, your identity, the one that doesn't have a job title attached to it. Here's the first thing I had to learn, and learning it required staying in one place long enough to feel it. The discomfort of early retirement is not a malfunction. It is information. I know that sounds simple, but stay with me. For 44 years, everything I did produced an external result. In the Army, the mission either succeeded or it didn't. My soldiers were ready or they weren't. In emergency management, there was either a functioning protocol or there wasn't. The feedback loop was constant, immediate, and clear. You knew where you stood because the work told you. When that ends, the feedback loop goes silent. And the silence doesn't mean nothing is happening. It means something is happening that doesn't make noise. The process of figuring out who you are when you are not defined by what you do, that process is quiet, slow, and completely unlike anything a career prepares you for. Travel disrupts it, not permanently, but consistently. Think about what travel does to your day. It fills it completely. There is always something to navigate, a gate, a reservation, a map, a local restaurant someone recommended, a schedule that requires coordination. You are not unstructured on a trip. You are structured by the trip. And that structure is comfortable in the way that all external structure is comfortable, which is to say it asks nothing of you except your presence and your attention. But it does not ask the hard question. The hard question is, what do you actually want your days to look like when there is no trip to plan and no destination to reach and no flight to catch? What do you do with a Tuesday in March when you are in your own home and there is nothing on the calendar and nothing particularly wrong and nothing particularly right? That question is the work of the first 2 years, and you cannot answer it from a hotel room. There was a man I sat with at the transition program I volunteer at out at Fort Liberty. I do this twice a week, sit with recently separated soldiers, talk about what the first year actually looks like. This man was a retired E8, 22 years of service, came in about 8 months after he'd left. He was sharp, thoughtful, well prepared in the ways that military training prepares you. He told me that his first year of retirement had been the best year of his life. He and his wife had done everything they'd planned. Italy, Ireland, 3 weeks in the national parks out west. He talked about those trips the way you talk about things that mattered, and they had mattered. I believed him completely. Then I asked him how year 2 was going. He was quiet for a long time, longer than the question seemed to require. And then he said, "The trips ran out." 3 words. The trips ran out. I want you to hear what he was not saying. He was not saying the trips were wrong. He was not saying the experiences were wasted. He was saying that when the structure of the trip was no longer there, he had no structure to fall back on. Because he had spent his first year in retirement building the skills of a traveler rather than the skills of a person living without a title. He had to start over. And he was now a year older, a year further from the edge of the transition, with less of the early momentum that the transition provides. The first year of retirement, there is a natural energy available to you. The novelty, the freedom from obligation, the genuine relief of being done. That energy is a resource. It is the raw material you use to build the life you're going to live. And he had used all of it on the trips. What I took from that conversation is something I had already been working out from my own experience, but hearing it from someone else made it concrete. The trips are the spending of the energy without the investment of it. You go somewhere, beautiful things happen, you come home, and the account is the same as when you left. There is a second piece of this that I have thought about more than the first one. Retirement does not happen to one person. Even when you're the one who worked the career, retirement happens to two people. And the first 2 years of constant travel can function as a way of delaying a reckoning that the marriage has been building toward for decades. I'll tell you what I mean by that. Patty and I spent 30 years with complementary schedules. I was at work, she was at school. We had rhythms built around absence and return. Dinner was a reunion. Weekends were time we had both earned. The structure of two separate careers created a natural organization to our shared life. And then that structure was gone. I retired. She had already retired. And we were suddenly in the same house, all day, every day, for the first time in the 38 years we had been married. Now I want to be very clear. Patty and I are in good shape. We have always been in good shape. But two people who have organized their relationship around complementary absences do not automatically know how to share continuous presence. That is a skill, and it has to be learned. And it cannot be learned while you are both on a cruise or driving through Montana. The travel delays the learning. It does not prevent it. But delay in early retirement is expensive, because early retirement is when the patterns you are going to live with get established. If you spend the first 2 years learning how to be traveling companions, rather than learning how to be retired companions, you arrive at year 3 without the skills the next 20 years are going to require. Patty said something to me once that I have thought about at least 100 times since. She said, "You can plan anything except yourself." She was talking about something else at the time. She says things like that without particularly meaning to be profound, and then they stay with me for years. But this one applies to travel and early retirement with a precision that I have not found a better way to express. You can plan a trip in extraordinary detail. Reservations, itineraries, packing lists, contingencies. All of it is plannable. But you cannot plan your way into knowing who you are at 63 when the title is gone and the kids are raised and the career is done and the calendar is empty and it is Tuesday at 9 in the morning and there is nowhere you have to be. That knowing comes from staying put and feeling the discomfort that the empty calendar produces, and then sitting with that discomfort long enough to hear what it is telling you. Not solving it, not filling it, hearing it. I fish the Cape Fear River 2 or 3 mornings a week when the weather allows. I want to be honest with you about why, because it is not the reason most people give for fishing. I do not particularly love fishing. I have caught fish. It is fine. What I go for is something different. The river requires just enough attention to quiet the part of my mind that is always looking for the next objective. There is nothing to manage, no decision of consequence to make, no one depending on my performance. I stand there with a line in the water, and the part of my brain that spent 44 years running operations has nothing to run, and eventually in that quiet, something else begins to surface. It took about 6 months of those mornings before I started to notice what was surfacing. Not big revelations, small ones. A clearer sense of what I actually wanted the shape of my days to look like. Not what the bucket list said I should want. Not what retirement is supposed to look like from the outside. What I actually, specifically wanted. The mornings, the quiet, the program at Fort Liberty, the conversations I was starting to have in the comments of videos that other people had posted, the particular satisfaction of sitting with a recently separated soldier and saying, "I know exactly what you're describing. Let me tell you what it looked like from the other side." None of that emerged on a trip. All of it emerged from staying still long enough to hear it. I want to go back to the man who traveled for 3 years, because I want to tell you how the conversation ended. He sat across from me and said, "I don't regret the trips." I believed him. I still believe him. Beautiful things happened on those trips. Real experiences, the kind you carry. And then he said something that has stayed with me. He said, "I thought I was retired. Turns out I was just between jobs. The job was travel." I want you to hear that. Turns out I was just between jobs. The job was travel. Because this is the thing about filling the early retirement years with a project. Any project, even a beautiful one. If the project is doing the work of external structure, then when the project ends, you are back at the beginning. You have not learned to live without external structure. You have learned to live with a different external structure. And the question you were avoiding, who are you when nothing is asking you to be anything in particular, is waiting patiently for you to stop moving. He told me he was starting over, essentially. At year 3, he was beginning the process that most people begin at month 2, and starting it with less runway, less early retirement energy, and the added complication of having told himself for 3 years that he had this figured out. The trips ran out, and then the work began. This is the central truth I want you to carry out of this video. The first 2 years of retirement are not a reward period. They are a construction period. The identity you are going to live inside for the next 20 or 25 years, the one that does not have a job title holding it up, is being built right now, whether you are paying attention to the construction or not. Travel does not interrupt the construction. What it does is ensure that you are building in your sleep, without oversight, without intention, without any of the deliberate attention that a construction project of that importance deserves. The man who stays put in early retirement, who lets the calendar go empty long enough to feel what that emptiness contains, who has the uncomfortable Tuesday mornings, who sits across from his wife at dinner with nothing to report about the day and has to figure out what they are to each other now that the career is not filling the space between them. That man arrives at year 3 with something the traveler does not have. He has a self, not a better self, not a more virtuous self, a self that has been examined under the conditions that the rest of his retirement is actually going to present, a self that has learned to function without external structure providing the meaning, a self that has discovered, in the uncomfortable quiet of those early months, what it actually wants and what it is actually for. That is not something you can find in an airport. Let me say it the way I've been circling around it this whole video. The trip doesn't change who you are when you land. The staying does. 2 years into the real retirement, I have taken one trip. One. Patty and I went to the Outer Banks for a week in the fall of the first year. It was right. We needed it. The water was good, the quiet was different from the home quiet, and something got reset that needed resetting. And then we came home, and we stayed. And we did the uncomfortable work of 2 people figuring out who they are to each other and to themselves when the careers are done and the kids are gone and the house is just the 2 of them, full time, with no particular agenda. I will not tell you every day of that was good. Some days it was not good. Some days the silence was heavy in a way that made the Outer Banks look very appealing from where I was sitting. But I stayed with it. Patty stayed with it. And what has come out of those 2 years is something I could not have planned and could not have traveled toward. I know who I am in retirement now. Not completely. Not with the certainty I had when the mission was clear and the structure was given. But genuinely, incrementally, in the specific and hard-won way that comes from having sat with the question long enough for it to start producing an answer. Before you book the next trip, or before you start planning the first one, I want to give you one question to sit with. Not to answer right now, just to sit with. Are you traveling towards something or away from it? You will know the difference if you are honest with yourself. If you are traveling towards something, toward a place that has always mattered, toward a person you have been meaning to visit, toward an experience that has been waiting for the right season of life, that is a different thing than what I've been describing today. That travel has a different quality to it, a different weight. But if the travel is away from something, away from the discomfort of unstructured days, away from the silence that the empty calendar produces, away from the conversation with your spouse that keeps getting postponed because there is always another destination to plan, then I want you to consider what you are postponing and whether it can afford to be postponed. The work of figuring out who you are after the career does not wait indefinitely. There is a window in early retirement when that question has the most energy available to answer it, when the novelty of the transition makes the discomfort more bearable and the honesty more accessible. That window closes. It does not close permanently, but it closes in the way that early morning closes, gradually and then completely, and you look up and the light has changed and you are not sure when it happened. I want to hear from you. Write one thing in the comments that you find hard to admit about your own retirement, about how you have been spending it, or how you have been planning to spend it. Not because I have anything to tell you about it, but because naming the honest thing is sometimes the first step to doing something with it. I read every comment that comes in here, all of them. Some of the most important things said on this channel have been said in the comments by people who wrote one sentence and moved on. Write the sentence. If what you heard today felt true to something you have been carrying, I would be glad for you to subscribe. Not for the numbers. This channel exists because my son Derek told me 2 years ago that what I kept trying to explain about this transition, other people needed to hear it, and not from a therapist, from someone who had been in it. So that is what I try to do here. If that is what you came for, hit the subscribe button and the bell. The conversations that happen here are honest in a way I did not expect, and I think that honesty is worth coming back for. I said at the beginning that I know a man who came home from his last trip and found the problem exactly where he left it. He is figuring it out now. It is harder at year 3 than it would have been at month 2, but he is doing it, and the doing of it has its own dignity. He knows what he is building now. He just wishes he had started building it sooner. You do not have to wish that. The window is still open. Stay home a little longer than you planned. Let the calendar go empty. Hear what the empty says.